anxious spirit forever new. Raise me up on eagle's wings, give my soul your bigger dreams, breathe your life into me. A battle cry is in my lungs, singing out your kingdom come, fall on us, pour out your love. I stand here at your feet, I'm laying down the fear in me. As your child, claiming peace, forgive this heart your victory. I stand here, I stand here. Away from brokenness, into your promises, Lord. I'm standing here. Oh, away from brokenness, into your promises, Lord. I'm standing here. I stand here at your feet. I'm laying down the fear in me. As your child, claiming peace, forgive this heart your victory. I stand here, I stand here.
Amen.
The scripture reading this morning is from Hebrews 11, 23 through 28. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as a son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel.
Amen.
If you please stand, we're going to sing from the hymnal, number 44. This is one of my mom's favorite songs. We're going to be singing verses 1 through 4.
Over and down the
through 9 says, But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, saying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God.
You may be seated. Turn with me, if you would, to Exodus. The book of Exodus. We're going to be in chapters 1 and 2, kind of the end of chapter 1, the beginning of chapter 2. And as you do that, let me give you a little bit of the background. So, as many of you know, the book of Genesis ends with Jacob's family moving to Egypt. Jacob has 12 sons. Joseph's one of them. Joseph leads them into Egypt. While they were in Egypt, they multiply very, very quickly. And so what starts out as kind of a family group with mom and dad and the 12 brothers, roughly 70 people in all. So what starts out with 70 people just explodes in the population after generation. The population is in the hundreds of thousands, and if not the millions. One of the other things that happens as their population in Egypt begins to grow and expand and multiply is that, as it tells us in Exodus chapter 1, all of a sudden there were more Hebrew people in Egypt than there were Egyptians in Egypt. From the Egyptian perspective, that was a problem. The king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, looks out and he sees all these Hebrew people, and he realizes, and he comes to himself and he says, listen, if the Hebrew people all got together, they could probably overthrow us. So there's more of them than there is of us. And if there was another country was to invade Egypt, the Hebrew people could certainly side with them, and together we would have no shot. The Pharaoh begins to stir up kind of anti-Semitic sentiment within Egypt. He begins to probably blame them for some problems and whisper and talk about, spread these rumors about how they're a threat, how they're going to overthrow Egypt. The king also had another problem. Egypt was a superpower in the world at that time. And it was a growing country, not just the Hebrew population, but the country as a whole was growing and expanding. And like any country that is growing and expanding, they had some infrastructure needs and some building projects that they needed completed. The Pharaoh is no fool. He looks at all of this going on. He looks at these two major problems, and he comes up with one solution that addresses both of them. The Pharaoh gets his people together, and somehow they say, listen, we are going to enslave the Israelites. We're going to enslave the Hebrew people. They're going to be our slaves. We're going to be their masters. They're going to work for us. They're going to do what we say. And not only does that have the benefit of providing a cheap, well, really free workforce for the Egyptians, providing the labor to build these cities and bridges and canals and whatever, but that also has the effect, the harsh labor and just the brutality of the enslavement has the effect, theoretically, of diminishing the Hebrew population. The interesting thing in the beginning of Exodus chapter 1 is that it doesn't really work as planned. Yeah, Israelites get a lot of work done. But unlike every other instance of genocide that we see in history, the funny thing about the Hebrews is that their population doesn't diminish, rather it continues to multiply and expand. This causes the Egyptians to live in great dread or great fear of the Hebrew people. And so we pick up the text in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 15, and just listen to this story. And again, I would ask as you listen, as you read along, kind of put yourself in that time for a moment. Put yourself in the situation that some of the characters find themselves in. Exodus chapter 1, starting at verse 15. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you help the Hebrew women give birth, observe them as they deliver. If the child is a son, kill him, but if it's a daughter, she may live. The Hebrew midwives, however, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this and let the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before a midwife can get there. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very numerous. Again, this is about the third time in the Exodus chapter 1 that we've seen this idea that the Israelites just keep multiplying and expanding in number. Since the midwives feared God, verse 21, since the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Pharaoh then, and now listen to this, since round 1, well, that was really round 2, since enslavement didn't slow the population growth, and his attempt to have the midwives commit infanticide didn't work, this is his third shot. Verse 22, Pharaoh then commanded all his people, so he's enlisted all of the Egyptian people, commands all his people, you must throw every son born to the Hebrews into the Nile, to let every daughter live. Now a man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she got him a papyrus basket for him and coated it with asphalt and pitch. By the way, the word there in the original language for basket is the same word that we see in Genesis chapter 6 through 8. A story that's probably familiar to many of you, the story of Noah and the ark. That word's the same word. Basket here, but ark there. So literally, she got a papyrus ark for him and coated it with asphalt and pitch. She placed the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Then his sister stood at a distance in order to see what would happen to him. Verse 5, Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe in the Nile while her servant girls walked along the riverbank. Seeing the basket among the reeds, she sent her slave girl to get it. When she opened it, she saw the child, a little boy, crying. She felt sorry for him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew boys." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Should I go and call a woman from the Hebrews to nurse this boy for you?" "Go," Pharaoh's daughter told her. So the girl went and called the boy's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay your wages." So the woman took the boy and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." Again, as a bit of a side note, this Egyptian princess maybe wasn't the most original in her naming. The word Moses in Egyptian really means son, so she named her son Son. And it sounds like a Hebrew word that means drawn out, and so it kind of worked on both ways, but maybe not the most original. Anyway, this is a really, really cool text. It's a really fun story. There's a lot here. There's a lot of different kind of directions and angles that we could take with it this morning. But here's my thought. This is Mother's Day. Day that we set aside to honor and love and just show or express our gratitude for our mothers, the people that are mothers in our life. If you see in your bulletin, I entitled this morning's message, if you will, Hero Moms. And so this is how I want to approach this text this morning. Approach it by looking at it, and I would suggest to you that there are 4 different women in this passage that act the role, that embrace the role of a mother. And I don't want to take anything away from mothers or from biological mothers, but at least for this morning, let's just expand that definition a bit to include women who may not be the biological mother, but women who leverage the presence, or women who leverages her presence in the life of another for the good of that other person. So we're just going to expand that mother thing a little bit as we look at this passage. So let me give you 4 attributes, 4 characteristics, if you will, from this passage of what a hero mom looks like. Number 1, hero moms fear God. Look at the story of the midwives. Remember, you come back to verse 15. The king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, comes to these midwives. He says, here's what we're going to do. When you go and you help a Hebrew woman give birth, if it's a girl, great, take care of the baby and let her live. But if it's a boy, you are to kill it. Remember that the Hebrews, including the Hebrew midwives, are slaves. The whole deal with being a slave is that you have really no choice but to do what your master tells you to. So here's these women and they're slaves, and yet they defy the order of a king. Again and again and again and again. Twice the text tells us that they feared God. They feared God more than they feared the king. And because they feared God, they refused to listen to him. Because they feared God, they refused to kill these babies. Fearing God has been defined as having such a reverence for him that it has a great impact on the way that we live our lives. Fearing God has been defined as respecting him and obeying him and submitting to his discipline and worshiping him in awe. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 28 says, "Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire." We see that idea in that text of worshiping God acceptably and appropriately. And the way that we do that is we recognize who God is. We recognize what God has done for us, what God has given to us. And then we submit to God in reverence and awe, not so much because we're afraid of him, not so much because we're afraid of being punished by him, but we submit to him in love, submitting because we seek to please him, because we recognize who he is. The Hebrew midwives were hero moms because they feared God. And I guess the question then becomes, well, what does that look like today? I don't think anybody is asking mothers to kill all the male babies that they know. What does a hero mom look like today? What does it look like for moms to fear God? And how do they express that in the way that they live? Let me give you, and you could probably come up with a better list than I did, but let me just suggest a couple things. Here moms recognize that their child is a gift from God. Just on a real basic level. The child is a gift from God. The children are a gift. They're a gift and not a God to be worshipped. I hear moms that fear God resist the temptation to use their child as a status symbol or as a source of their own identity. Let me give you another one. I believe hero moms that fear God, are more concerned about what God thinks of them than what their neighbor, sister, mother, aunt thinks about them. But here moms are more concerned with what God thinks of them than what their Facebook friends or their Pinterest followers think about who they are and how they raise their kid. One of the things I've noticed in social media, I realize social media is kind of a two-edged sword. It can be very, very good. It can also be very, very bad. One of the things I think we see as parents and specifically as mothers on social media is what I call, or what has been described as these mommy wars, where you post pictures of your perfect family. And it becomes this weird kind of cycle of peer pressure and, well, they did this, or they went on this vacation, or their house looks like this, or I just saw a picture of their kitchen and there's no dishes on the counter, and their kids love them and are perfect, and look what kind of healthy food this mom cooks, and if I could only be like her. Well, look, that mom sent her kid to this summer camp or to this music camp. And if I was a good mother like her, I would do that too. And around and around and around we go, and when that happens, not only do the kids lose, but we as parents, but for our context today, certainly mothers in particular, I think get caught up in trying to be like somebody else and worrying about, well, am I as good as they are? But here are moms that fear God, are more concerned with what God thinks of them as a mother and as a parent than they are with their neighbor, their friend, or their social media acquaintance is. And sometimes, it means that hero moms say no. Sometimes that means that hero moms, just because somebody on Facebook is doing X, Y, and Z, means that they won't. Because they realize that that doing so would go against God's will. Secondly, look at Moses' actual mother. Now, it doesn't come up in this text. Moses had a father and a mother. His father's name was Amram. His mother's name was Jochebed. Moses had two older siblings that we know of. The oldest, I think, in the family was his sister named Miriam. Miriam isn't named, but she comes up in this story. The second child, the best that we know, was a brother named Aaron. If you read the book of Exodus, there's a lot in there about Aaron. Aaron is about 3 years older than Moses. So Aaron was born during this time when the midwives were supposed to be killing all the baby boys but weren't. So Aaron is also a miracle baby. But I look at the life, I look at the witness of Moses' mother, this woman named Jochebed. Again, the book of Hebrews tells us that by faith, when he was born, he was hidden for 3 months by his parents. This text tells us, in verse 2 of chapter 2, the woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. Again, put yourself in this position. Moses' mother was a slave. Moses' mother was defying the edict of the king. Remember, she was supposed to throw Moses into the Nile River. Thought about it this week, and I can't imagine what that experience would have been like. Imagine knowing that you're pregnant, spending that, I know you're pregnant for 9 months, but maybe you only realize it for 7, 8. Anyway, that 9 months, imagine what that was like, wondering if you were going to have a boy or a girl. Hoping that you were going to have a girl so that you weren't forced to throw your baby boy. And did you just imagine that tension? And that finally that day comes. The midwife is there and you give birth and she says it's a boy. You want to be happy. You want to celebrate. But you realize the situation that's going on. You realize the climate that you are living in. You realize that all of your Egyptian neighbors are spies working against you. Don't discount that word from Hebrews, by faith. Moses' parents, and it specifically mentions his mother in Exodus chapter 2. By faith, when Moses was born, she hid him for 3 months. Hid him for a time when as a newborn infant it was probably not easy, but easier to hide him. I don't think there's anything magic about 3 months. I think it is more indicative of just as the baby grows and develops and matures, and is a little bit more active and is a little louder, maybe is more needy, it will certainly become harder to hide. I cannot imagine. Can't imagine. It would be like to be in her position. I can't imagine what it would be like to make an ark. And I know she takes pitch and tar and she coats it and she tries to make this vessel as watertight as it possibly can. But I can't imagine what it would be like to make an ark and to put your 3-month-old son in it and to put it in the edge of the Nile River. By faith. By faith. She did that. I believe hero moms. The hero moms are moms that live by faith. I know that none of you, none of us face that situation today with our children. But I believe that there are situations that mothers face today that require faith. The hero moms, faithful moms, know their role, they know God's role. They strive to train up their children in the Lord. But hero moms realize that there's an extent to there's a limit to what they can do. But the hero moms, by faith, do what they are called and allow God or hand, almost, if you will, hand their kids over to God. The faithful hero moms acknowledge that God loves their child more than they do. And that ultimately God is their child's redeemer and protector and friend. Faith goes hand in hand, I believe, with fear in God. By faith, I think hero moms trust God's word. Trust that maybe saying no to their child will ultimately reap benefit and reward. Look at Moses' sister. Kind of the third woman, if you will, in this story. We don't know a whole lot about Miriam, at least not at this point in her life. Certainly she shows up later on in the book of Exodus. It's been suggested that Miriam was probably between 8 and 12 years old, and here's why. She had to be old enough that she knew kind of what was going on, because at some point Miriam and her mother had this really, really difficult conversation about how baby brother's going to be put in an ark and we're going to, put him in the Nile River. So she had to be old enough to be responsible, to understand and know what was going on, but she had to be young enough. Remember, they're slaves. At some point, it's believed that Miriam would have been expected to do her day's work. So it would seem like she would be younger than that. And so that commonly you hear the thought is that she's maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, somewhere in there. I'm impressed by Miriam in this passage. For a young woman, for a girl, I think she's very, very wise. I'm impressed with how quick she thinks, how quick she acts. In the same way that the hero moms are wise, that they act wisely, that they look at a situation and they're able to evaluate it and determine what the right, what the good, what the proper course of action is. The hero moms know and understand what the Word of God says in James chapter 1 and verse 5, where it says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him, or in this case her, ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach. Wise hero moms understand that the Bible doesn't address every situation that arises. But wise hero moms, I think, are able to apply what the Bible does say, are able to take some of the principles that the Bible does say and translate them to a particular situation. Wise moms intentionally look for moments, look for opportunities to train and to teach and to inspire their kids. Wise hero moms know when to intervene on behalf of their child. And the flip side is probably also true, that they know when to allow their child maybe to even experience some level of pain or discomfort, because they know that in learning that, and experiencing that, they will learn that lesson, and that lesson will give dividends later on. Lastly, I know she's an Egyptian. I know that they're kind of the bad guys in this story, but look at the role that the Egyptian princess, the unnamed Pharaoh's daughter, plays in this story. It's probably the morning. She goes down to the Nile River to bathe. She's surrounded by kind of all her attendants. And she sees, or maybe even hears, the sound. She sees this basket there among the reeds at the bank of the Nile River. She sends one of her servants to go over it. I mean, it's this little basket covered with tar, floating among the reeds. So she sends one of her servants to go over and get this and bring this back. And she gets it, she opens it up, and she sees here's this little baby boy, and he's crying. She knows. She understands the situation. She knows her father's edict. She knows what the rule is. She knows who this baby is and why he's there. But here's the really cool part, and this is why I say I think she deserves a lot of credit in this story. The Pharaoh's daughter is willing to use her position of authority, her power, and her influence for the good of the child Moses. I believe that hero moms, likewise, use their position, use their sphere of influence for the good of children, for the good of those who are powerless. The hero moms do that today. I think a lot of you that are mothers certainly do that for your child, but I think about, and this is why I tried to expand the definition a little bit, I think about this in terms of aunts. I think about this in terms of grandmothers or even neighbors or even friends. How many of you have the opportunity to help a neighbor child, to help a niece or a nephew? How many of you have the ability to use the position, the role, the influence that you may have in your life to positively affect the life of someone else? 4 ways. The hero moms are 4 things. They fear God, they are faithful, they are wise, and they use the resources, they use the influence that they have. But let me point out something else from this passage. And I was drawn to this passage. I just wanted to both speak to moms, but also hopefully to bless and encourage moms this morning. I think my favorite part about this passage is that it doesn't just stop with those kind of 4 ideas. I love the way that God responds to the hero moms in this story. Look at this again. Let's go walk back through it very quickly. Look at the midwives. Right? These people that feared God more than they feared the king. I believe God responds to their holy, to their appropriate fear with peace. Those women had guts. Not only did they defy the king's order, right? Kill the boys, they don't do it. He calls them back in. Did you catch that? Verse 18 of chapter 1. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this and let the boys live?" So they knew they were disobeying the king. The king calls them in a second time, and their answer is, it's priceless. Then the midwives, verse 19, the midwives said to Pharaoh, "The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before a midwife can get to them." Listen, it is only somebody that has the peace of God that can approach a king, insult the king's people, and then proceed to tell him why they are disobeying his direct order in the first place. I love that excuse. Well, king, there's something, the Egyptian women, they're weak, I don't know. But us Hebrew women, they're vigorous, and they, because I don't know, the truthfulness, I don't know how that worked. Maybe shared this before, but I couldn't help but thinking about it, remembering it again as I was kind of going back through this. Our youngest, London, was born right here, right that way, in Malone, in Alice Hyde. And they came, and Kristen knew it was the time, so we go to the hospital. We're just kind of hanging out there for a couple hours. And the nurses were in and out, like nurses do during that time. And it finally gets to the point, and again, this is Krista's 3rd one. I don't really know anything, but it's her 3rd one. And she looks at me and says, "Okay, Nate, it's time." So the baby's coming out. We're ready. Here we go. It's time. Nobody's around. We couldn't find a nurse, and so eventually the nurse comes in. And so we tell the nurse, "Hey, listen, this baby's coming out." And I never forget what the nurse said. She checked Kristen, and this kind of look of panic just came over her face. And she said, "You're right, it is." Yeah, I know. But then she said this. She said, "Okay, but you can't push yet. You can't have your son yet. You have to wait until the doctor gets here." I don't know a whole lot. I don't claim to be an expert on this. I don't know exactly how this works, but I know there comes a point when there's no more waiting. That's essentially what the Hebrew midwives tell Pharaoh. After they insult Pharaoh's people, they say, Pharaoh, listen, I don't know what to tell you, but man, the time comes and away we go. Not only does God bless their fear with peace, but listen to this, look at this. Verse 20, so God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very numerous. That's great. But look at verse 21. Since the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Now, I don't know everything about the culture and context, but here's what I believe. I believe that generally speaking, midwives were women that did not or could not have families of their own. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Again, I'm not an expert on childbirth, but I know that, at least naturally, the baby's going to come when the baby's ready to come. And sometimes that happens, at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning when it's convenient, and sometimes that happens at 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. We don't get to pick, you understand what I'm saying, when the baby comes. So I think logically, if you think about it, it would make sense that women that didn't or couldn't have families of their own, maybe the ones that they used as midwives, because they were available, they had time, they weren't caring for their own family. It's not a slight against them, that just seems to be how it worked. I point that out to say, don't miss verse 21, don't miss the blessing. Here were these women that feared God. Here were these women that were more concerned about what God thought than what people thought. Not only does God bless them with peace, with this peace as is described in Philippians chapter 4, as peace that surpasses all understanding, peace that is greater than our ability to comprehend it. God gives them that peace as they face and as they interact with Pharaoh. God blesses them by giving them, as the text says, families of their own. There was no greater social stigma during that time than for a woman to not have kids. God takes their fear and blesses them with peace and blesses them beyond that. Look at the blessing for Moses' mother. Remember, Jochebed not once but twice gives Moses up. Once by placing him in the basket, but a second time then, when he's older, he actually gives him back to the princess. But notice the way that God blesses her. By faith, she hid Moses. By faith, she puts Moses into the ark. Ephesians chapter 3. Verse 20 says, now to him who is able to above and beyond. And in the King James it says, exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think according to the power that works in us. Don't miss God's blessing for her faith. See what happens? The princess finds the baby. Miriam goes to the princess. Says, hey, I know this woman can maybe take care of the baby, can maybe nurse the baby until he's old enough, and then you can have him back. God works it out in such a way that not only does Moses' mother get her son back, but she gets paid. She gets paid to take care of her son. How cool is that? I mean, I love being a parent. Like, that's really fun. But I gotta think it would be better if I got paid to be a parent. You know what I'm saying? God blesses her faith. God blesses the fact that she was willing in faith to give her child up. There are numerous examples of that throughout history. I think of somebody like William Wilberforce, 17 and 1800s in England. We talked about slavery in the adult Sunday school class this morning. William Wilberforce grew up in a Christian home. some point his parents let him go, and he goes off to college, and he gets involved in kind of all these worldly things. And it's not until later on in his life where William comes back and is witnessed to and mentored by another man and gives his life to Christ. William then devotes his life in the British Parliament to creating and enacting and passing legislation that forbids slavery. I believe that God blesses faith. I believe God blesses faithful moms. Not only was Moses' mother blessed by being paid to take care of him, but the blessing of her son after leaving the second time ultimately coming back. Only it comes full circle. Moses remembers who he is. Moses remembers his upbringing and his heritage. Moses hears God's call on his life and comes back. And that's the passage that Brenda read a few minutes ago. By faith, Moses refuses to be known as an Egyptian prince and rather identifies himself with the Hebrew people and heeds God's call. I believe that God blesses faithful moms. We looked at Miriam briefly. We saw the wisdom that she displayed, and wisdom that's just incredible for a young girl, for a young woman. We see how God blessed her wisdom, how God blessed her actions and her quick thinking. That God blesses wisdom with success. Miriam again approaches the princess and she says, hey, I know this person. I know this person that can take care of that baby. Incredible blessing when we use godly wisdom, when we use godly discernment. Lastly, I believe that God blesses moms that use their position, use their resources, use their authority to benefit somebody else. Look at the princess. Because of who she was, because she was Pharaoh's daughter, because she's the princess, she could get away with this. Unknowingly. We give her some credit for what she did. We give her credit that she was compassionate. She didn't have any idea what her role in kind of the grand scheme of human history would be. She simply used her position, used the resources that she had to take care of and to bless this child. We look at Moses' life and we see the dividends that paid and is still paying today. Here's my thought. Moms that fear God, moms that are faithful, moms that use godly wisdom, moms that use the position and the resources that God has given them. Not only will they work and bless others, but they too will be blessed. Let's pray. God, God, I thank you for your word, just for even the story aspect, but beyond that, God, I thank you for what it teaches us. Thank you for how it reveals your character, how it reveals your person to us. But God, I think about this story and the role that mothers played in it. God, there are 4 moms in this story who successfully worked against and subverted the evil plans of a powerful king. God, we praise you for that. But we also praise you for what that means for today. God, I thank you for mothers, for the role that they have, for the role that they play. God, would you strengthen just the mothers that are part of this congregation? God, would you give them a holy fear? God, would you give them just an amazing faith? God, would you give them that wisdom that only you can provide? God, would you give them the foresight and the willingness to use their position and their resources for the good of others? And Father, as they do that, would you bless them? God, would you just bless them? Again, God, we thank you. We love you, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. go. First Christian Church exists to
love God, love people, share life, share Jesus.
have a wonderful Mother's Day.